Welcome, fellow hopefuls. Let's start today with a question. How much do you know about God? Post your answers in the comments and, try not to list everything. We don't have time for that. I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay, let's get started. My name is Micah Hallery. I am a former pastor, a current teacher, and a future YouTuber, and today we're going to have a little nugget. So many of you have probably heard the story of the 7 blind men and the elephant. And if you haven't, I'll give you a very brief, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but 7 blind men walk up to an elephant and each of them encounters a different part. One comes up to the tusk and he feels the tusk and it's got a sharp point in the end. And he says, the elephant is just like a spear. Another one comes up against the belly and he's like, no, the elephant's like a wall. And then someone sees the tail and is like, no, it's like a rope. And then someone sees the trunk, oh, it's like a snake. And everyone's got a different perspective. And who's right? Well, they're all right. And they're all wrong because they make the assumption that that little bit of information that they have is all there is to know. And we see that about God. Now, understand, I've been studying the Bible since I could read. I've been listening to God's voice since I was a teenager. I've been pondering the scriptures for decades. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of God and what he's like and getting to know him personally. And I got to a point in my life where I really thought I knew everything there was to know about God from a personality level. And it did not produce good fruit in my life. I know that sounds shocking. Who could imagine that something as arrogant as thinking that you knew everything about God would not produce good fruit? But let me show you some things that it actually did do. First of all, when we get to a point where we think we know everything about God or his personality or his rules or whatever it is, it prevents us from continuing to pursue. And that's important. I remember when I was learning about relationships, learning about marriage, and preparing to go into the ministry, one of the things that they commented on was how women like to be pursued. And if a man pursues a woman until marriage and then stops pursuing them, well, something that was a part of the relationship prior to marriage isn't there after the marriage. And that can be very harmful to the relationship. God likes to be pursued too. He wants us to pursue him, to seek after him. Isn't that what he says? Whoever seeks after me with all his heart will find me. And so if we think we've got it all figured out, we're going to stop pursuing him. And if we sit back in our knowledge and think, yeah, I've got this, it's going to develop a lackluster relationship with God, or might I use a biblical term, a lukewarm relationship with God. Second of all, when we think we've got it all figured out, this prevents us from learning new things. Just like the guy that was feeling the wall, he rejected the tail and the I want to say the spear, the tusk. He looks at those and says, no, you're wrong because this is what it is. You actually can't learn new things about God when you think you've got it all figured out. And when somebody gives you something new, you just either, well, that must be this too because I already understand that, or you must be wrong. And there's a great Native American saying where you can't pour water into a full cup. You can't learn something if you think you've already got all the information that there is. And God's bigness, the scope of what he is gets lost on us. And we forget that part of him. And that actually makes God smaller in our own eyes, and it produces all kinds of bad fruit in our relationship. Third, this prevents us from realizing our own blind spots. Now, I know what you're saying. I don't have any blind spots. I'm not deceived. Well, I've got a bit of bad news for you. Everybody is deceived. Nobody has it 100% correct. And so the goal isn't to find out if you're deceived. The goal is to figure out how you're deceived, because you're going to be deceived in some ways. And if you think you've got all the theology right, you think you've got all the information correct, then you will not be open to receive correction from God. And things that God does or asks you to do, you will reject because it's outside of your current experience. If someone said, the elephant is like a rope, let's do this with the elephant, you could say, well, no, because he's like a wall. He doesn't do that. It's the same thing with, in your life. God may ask you to reach out to a person you like. You don't want that person. That's an obvious example. But he also might ask you to reach out in a way you thought was, not cool. My favorite example of that is when God comes to Peter and tells him to go to Cornelius' house. And Peter's like, hey, I've never eaten anything unclean. And God says, I have told you to go do this 3 times. Go to this person's house. Don't even hesitate. That was something that was uncool. God, you can't ask me to eat with, Gentiles and go into their houses. I'll be unclean. That's not right. And God says, don't call anything unclean that I have made clean. And so if we think we've got it all figured out, God may ask us to do something that we will reject, even though it's his will. It's arrogant to assume that you know everything about God. And that sounds, duh, but we still do that. We still get to the point where we're like, well, my Jesus wouldn't do it like that. Be careful when you say that. Be careful when you make that judgment. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to get notifications on new videos, and don't forget to answer today's question in the comments. How well do you know God? And a better answer is, did your answer change from the beginning of the video to the end of the video? You might have started with, yes, I know all this about God, and now you're like, well, maybe I don't know anything about God. Post that in the comments. All of those things help the algorithm. And share the video with other people so they can get the encouragement from these as well. Join me on Instagram, Facebook, go to my webpage, hopebeyondhype.com, and you can get links to all my social media there. That's your hope for today. See you next time.